Hi guys, so in today's lesson we're going to look at the rise of the Sinn Fein party in the aftermath of the 1916 Rising. So we're finishing up with the Rising now, and we're looking at the years that came afterwards, and this is looking at the political system and how the politics of Ireland was influenced and shaped by the events of the Rising. So, just to start off, I want to think back to Sinn Fein and what we'd learned about them earlier in this unit. So we're not talking about modern day Sinn Fein, okay, it's still the same connected party, but very, very different in a lot of ways. So we want to think, what do you remember about Sinn Fein and its political ideas at the beginning of the 1900s? So you might want to look back through the booklet or look back through your notes from previous lessons to see what they believed and what they wanted at the time. Do you think the ideas of Sinn Fein and those of the Rising leaders were the same? And what differences were there between the two? Okay, so it's important to have this good context of what Sinn Fein was before the Rising, just so we can really understand what happened with Sinn Fein after the Rising. So pause here for a few minutes and kind of go and answer those questions. Okay, so when you went back and looked through your notes or looked in the booklet, you should have found that the Sinn Fein from before the Rising was very, very different to what the Rising leaders had wanted. So Sinn Fein was following a system of parliamentary abstention. They weren't taking their seats in Parliament, or that was their policy, not to take seats in Parliament. What they wanted to do was set up a government in Dublin to run Ireland. They, however, still wanted a queen to keep the monarch of England as the monarch of Ireland. They wanted certain connections with Britain in terms of foreign policy, and they were definitely not looking for a full republic that came to be looked for by the people who ran the Rising, by the IRB. So there's huge differences between the two of these. Okay. However, we will see during this lesson how Sinn Fein really changes hugely after the Rising. Its membership and its popularity hugely changes. The Sinn Fein before the Rising was not a very popular party. It didn't hold much influence in the Irish political system. It was the IPP, the Irish Parliamentary Party, the Home Rule Party, that really that was really the most popular one and that people supported more. So Sinn Fein very much a low-level party at this time. However, they do become very important. So for this lesson, we want to be aware of the role of Sinn Fein in the Rising, and we want to understand how and why Sinn Fein grew in popularity after the Rising. And to put things quite simply, Sinn Fein essentially didn't have a role in the Rising. Sinn Fein were not connected to the Rising as a party. Okay, now there may have been individuals in Sinn Fein who were also members of the IRB and may have been involved with the Rising, but Sinn Fein itself, as a political party, was not connected and was not engaged in the organisation of the Easter Rising. Okay, so it's very, very important to be aware of that. However, something strange happens afterwards in that they're not involved in the Rising, but they are given credit or blame for the Rising. Okay, so what happens is you see this newspaper here. This is how the media respond to the Rising, and they call it the Sinn Fein Rising. Okay, so the Sinn Fein Rebellion. And really what's going on here, okay, and sorry, just before I go into this, there's three questions there. So why is the Sinn Fein were credited with having organised a rising? What do you think the surviving leaders might now do? And do you think that Sinn Fein were likely to benefit from this association, and why? So Sinn Fein were not involved in the Rising. They did not plan it. They were not as a party, were not actively involved in it. However, the people who were involved in it were mainly the IRB, and as we know, the IRB is a secret organisation. Okay, people aren't supposed to know who's in it. The other people involved in the Rising were, of course, volunteers, but they had separated and distanced themselves from the Rising due to Owen MacNeill's letter in the Sunday Independent. We also have the Irish Citizens' Army, which were obviously a major part of the Rising, but this is a very small group and is very much led by Connolly. And Connolly, of course, is executed after the Rising. So essentially what we have is we have a Rising where the people who were involved, the people who led it, all the leaders have been, most of the main leaders have been executed or imprisoned. So, the main philosophical leaders, people like Pearse and Clark, MacDonagh, Kant, all these men, these have all been executed for their involvement in the rising. So there's no one there left to take credit or to take blame for the rising. And the IPP clearly hasn't been involved in this. This is not what the IPP is looking for. They are very much, off uh, being involved with World War One and promoting home rule. The volunteers have separated themselves through Owen McNeill's letter in the Sunday Independent. The Citizens' Army is essentially all but wiped out, and so people are looking for someone, and the media is of course looking for someone to put the blame or put the credit of and to hold responsible for the rising, and they turn to Sinn Fein. And the reason this is most likely happening is because Sinn Fein is in terms of the open political and public organisations, it is probably the more extreme of them. Okay, and it's very much an outlier and an organisation that maybe isn't as well understood by the general public, and so it becomes known as the Sinn Fein Rebellion. Okay, so Sinn Fein are credited with this, and this is important because the surviving leaders, so the vast majority, the main leaders, people like Pearse and the men we have mentioned, are assassinated. These 16 men who are are executed after the rising, but there are a number of leaders who do survive. People like Countess Markovich and Eamon de Valera, two very, very important people in the rising who managed to escape execution for whatever reasons. These two and the other people who are involved and other leaders, people who come to the fore like Michael Collins and Harry Boland, they start to look and say, okay, we can't have another rising right now. A huge amount of them are in prison. What way can we organise ourselves? And when Sinn Féin is giving credit for the rising, they turn and they say, okay, well, here's an organisation that's already kind of on its feet. People know a bit about it. We don't need to go and totally set up everything ourselves. Let's join Sinn Féin. And really they go in and they kind of take over Sinn Féin, so that Arthur Griffith, the man who founded Sinn Féin, releases he still remains a very prominent member of the party, but releases control of the party, and Eamon de Valera actually becomes the leader of it. Okay, so de Valera, who was a commander one of the commanding officers in the rising, is now leader of the political party, alongside a number of other people who were involved in the rising, such as Michael Collins. So the leaders who are involved and people who are now coming to the fore as leaders of the rebels turn and start to join in with Sinn Féin, and the two kind of merge together. And so the IRB and Sinn Féin become very, very closely linked. It is likely now that there's two possible outcomes. Sinn Féin could suffer from this. They could say, when the rising first happens, they could see that this is a dangerous thing because people were quite angry about the rising. But over time, people are starting, and due to the executions that happened, public opinion is very much turning in support of the rebels. And so Sinn Féin actually hugely benefits from this. The party itself hugely benefits from being associated with the rising and having the leaders of the rising and the rebels kind of join in with its ranks. And so Sinn Féin grows hugely, hugely in popularity. But the reason why Sinn Féin grows, it's almost a media mistake in that they attribute the rising to Sinn Féin, even though it was not Sinn Féin who organised it. Okay, so maybe take a few minutes here and kind of look at those questions. There's of course the booklet, and it's on, I believe, I was checking, page 11 of the booklet. There is plenty of information there to fill out to support your answers of what we've just gone through. Okay, so when you're finished with those questions, we'll move on, and we're looking now at what happened. So Sinn Féin is gaining a huge number of members in terms of the leaders of the rising. The party itself is growing, and there's a lot more membership in it. The next major election comes along in 1918, and this is where we see the political landscape of Ireland totally shift. Okay, a huge, huge turn in terms of the political landscape. So there are 105 parliamentary seats available to Ireland. Okay, 105 people are supposed to be elected as MPs to go and sit in Westminster. before this, the vast majority, this has basically been split between the Home Rule Party, the IPP, and the Unionists, and there's about 23 seats that typically go to the Unionist Party. Okay, so the Unionists hold these 23 seats. The majority of them you can see there up in Northern Ireland. There's also Trinity College in Dublin has seats, and the Unionists tend to control that seat as well. So there's a small number of Unionists who are taking the seats, and that is pretty much standard. But the rest of the seats, so there's around 70, it's around, what is it, 79 seats or so left in that. Yeah, sorry, my math, I should have done the maths before this, but around 70 something seats left. The majority of these seats before the election belonged to the IPP. The IPP had control over them. But as you'll see in the map here, what happens is a huge, huge shift in that the entire country essentially switches from supporting the IPP over to supporting Sinn Fein. And Sinn Fein actually win 73 seats in this election. Right, so they go from 0 seats to 73 in a single election. The IPP, on the other hand, had 73 in the previous election. That falls down to just 6. So you can see a huge swing from one party, from the IPP, over to Sinn Fein. Okay, so IPP loses out hugely. Sinn Fein wins 73 seats. It's now by far the major political party in Ireland. But as we know, they practice parliamentary abstention, which means that the members who are elected from Sinn Féin who are elected, well, many of them are actually in prison, so they can't even take their seats even if they wanted to. But they don't. None of them will take their seats, and they are actually going to now set about setting up their own government in Ireland. And this is really where what leads in towards the War of Independence, is that these Sinn Féin politicians, these rebels from the Rising, set up their own parliament, set up a government within Dublin, and begin to try and enact Irish freedom. And they set about organising the War of Independence and really setting Ireland up as a country. But the fact that Sinn Féin does it, there's a huge amount to be paid here to the mistakes, essentially, of the media in terms of giving this credit for the rising to the Sinn Féin party. So this is your only second task for today, so it's quite a short lesson today. I want to know how many seats did Sinn Féin win in the election of 1918. So I've said it there a few minutes ago. Okay, you can also, of course, go and look at the booklet if you didn't catch that. I want to know which party lost a huge number of seats in this election. I want you then, this is the main task for today, is to imagine you're a person voting in this election. Which party would you vote for and why? So you have all these different parties on the side. You can see up on the left-hand side of the image of Sinn Féin, the Irish Unionists, the IPP, then there's Labour Unionists and Independent Unionists. We're not going to go into them, discuss them really, okay? But which party would you vote for? Why would you vote for them? And I wanted you to explain your answer. I'm looking for 5 to 6 sentences here. So if you're voting for the IPP, I want to vote for the Home Rule Party because of this, 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 and this. Okay, this is what I believe, this is what I think they should do. Or I'm voting for Sinn Féin because of this, 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 and this. This is why I think they are the party to lead Ireland into the future. Okay, so have a real think about it, okay? Pay attention to what you're writing and, put yourself in the mind of someone in this time period. Okay, so next week we will actually be moving on to the CBA, so I'll be talking to you all on Monday about that. For now, we will be leaving off with this unit after today for a few weeks. Okay, so we're leaving it just at a nice place where we're just about to go into the War of Independence. Okay, any questions, guys, just send me an email.